Good evening, everyone. Eric O'Brien here, about to read the next segment, episode 7 of Kerr's Rage, part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga, by me. Okay, episode 7 takes up where we left off yesterday, July 21st, 2020. Okay. We're in the midst of a storm. Dartin and Leander and the crew members are struggling to survive. Cut the rigging loose, Kane raged. Cut it loose. Struggling to maintain control of the helm, he was barely heard above the roar of the wind and rain. The few crewmen that were left scrambled toward the wreckage, hanging on to the ropes and shattered rigging to avoid being thrown overboard. Only Dartin and Leander were able to reach the torn rigging in time. With powerful waves surging over them, they drew their seamen's knives and hacked at the ropes tying the broken mast to her sides. Knocked off their feet several times, they fought to stand with the relentlessness born of desperation, and continued their task until they were finally successful. The mainmast tore loose with a thunderous crack, and the struggling ship righted itself with only 5 or 6 feet of its hull left above the tortured sea. The storm, now raging harder than ever, prevented communication of any kind. To keep themselves from being washed overboard, they tied themselves to the ship with any means available. Many of them prayed to the gods of the sea for mercy. Dartin Odinson, half-elf from the northern wastes, prayed to his god. His faith was so strong that he had no fear of death. Father, protect us from the raging storm and grant us strength. Tied to the base of the broken mast beside Leander, he gripped the sagging ropes around himself and prayed for courage, for here, most certainly, was the work of Loki, the great trickster. He bent his head low to avoid the punishing wind-driven rain, and his brown hair was matted about his face. Water poured over his brow, but his brown eyes pierced it with their ferocity. He would neither give up nor give in. His body was stocky and strong like his father's, but his half-pointed ears told of his Laios Elfar mother, who bore him in Iconurthra, the ice fortress of the northern elves. Throughout the world of men, he was often viewed as a half-breed, a bastard with no home but here at sea. He and Leander were merely sailors trying to survive. Many of the crew prayed to the gods of the sea for mercy, but he was never one to beg. If he died, it would not matter, for he would only stand beside his father in Odin's army that much sooner. Then they would join in the final battle against Loki's giants at Ragnarok. Mighty Odin, All-Father, he prayed. If I am to die this night, then so be it. I have fought the storm, and I will fight it to my last breath. He knew that there would be no Valhalla for a warrior that showed fear. The storm raged throughout the night and into the following morning. When it finally abated, the survivors found themselves adrift without sails or oars, with no land in sight upon any horizon. Except for Kane, Targon, Dartin, and Leander, the entire crew had been lost. Targon, Kane raged. See if you can find out where in the hell we are. Dartin, Ash, go below and see if any of the provisions can be saved. Accustomed to command, he needed to reassert his pride to avoid losing his sanity. His crew was lost, his cargo destroyed by the storm. They returned grim-faced after several minutes. They knew that the captain wouldn't like to hear any more bad news. It doesn't look good, Captain, Dartin said. Out with it! How much worse can it get? He felt like a helpless bottle, adrift and alone upon an endless sea. Great rolling waves and a strong current were driving them ever westward, and they could see no sign of shore. We've got 1 case of salt pork and 2 barrels of figs below. 3 barrels of fresh water are still intact. Most everything else has been washed overboard or destroyed by the sea. What of the grain and other provisions? It's all been ruined by seawater, Captain. The precious cargo is still intact in the forward hold. Very well, Dartin, Kane said with a voice filled with dismay. Targon, where in the sea hag's cursed breeches are we? His heart was heavy, and he couldn't hide the hopelessness that he felt. I need to wait until nightfall to be certain, Captain, but I guess that the storm pushed us back the way that we came. The prevailing currents should bring us within sight of land, although I don't know how far south we'll drift before we get there. We could enter waters controlled by pirates. That's all that we need. Dartin, Leander, see if you can fashion a suitable raft from the wreckage. We may need to abandon ship and row for shore. Aye, aye, sir. And so the once great merchant ship Courageous Heart drifted on, its gunwales dangerously close to the surging sea. For 11 days they drifted steadily west, their provisions nearly gone, their water supply dwindling. The merciless sun and wind did its work on their skin and on their spirits, and all their hope began to fade. But the 12th day was to become a day of miracles. Sunrise brought visions of white velvet wings. The piercing cries of seagulls were filling the air as they flew about the ship. Targon, Ash, look, Kane said. We must be nearing land. Leaping to their feet, the 4 sailors clutched the port side of Kuromashora, straining to see the western horizon. Look there, Captain, Leander said. Do you see the sail? Aye, Ash. Aye, indeed. She seems to be headed straight for us, Dartin said. But the triangular-shaped sails could mean only one thing. Pirates? Kane asked worriedly. No, sir. It must be the good ship Water Spirit, captained by Valon Swiftaro. It's one of Lord Cherrick's fastest warships. She's a pirate hunter. Let's just hope they don't think we're buccaneers. Let's just hope that they show us the seaman's courtesy and treat us with respect. The shipmates continued their vigilance, wondering what their encounter with the warship would bring them. Their flag had sunk to the bottom with their mast, and they were adrift in pirate-patrolled waters. The state of their vessel might prove hard to explain indeed, for the damage to their ship could have just as well occurred in ship-to-ship combat. None of them took their eyes off of the approaching ship for fear that it might disappear, the work of some illusion created by minds starved for hope. Yet in less than an hour's time, Water Spirit had approached within hailing distance. A brilliant black flag flew from her mainmast. With an embroidered golden lion at its center, the ship's billowing sails seemed to lift it from the surface of the sea, 100 feet of wood, iron, and weapons of war. Turning leeward, the immense ship neared Courageous Heart. Water Spirit. Valon Swiftaro was a skilled naval commander, and he took his job and the lives of his crew very seriously. Responsible for patrolling many leagues of open sea to the southeast of the king's land holdings, he had a difficult and often dangerous responsibility. Pirate vessels and smugglers from the southern provinces were constant threats to the fair trade and fishing that most of Safe Haven's people enjoyed. While patrolling some 15 leagues off the coast of Lord Khan's Point, his lookouts had spotted a ship riding low in the water with a broken mast. Full sail ahead, he ordered, and Water Spirit's prow sliced through the sea with power and grace. Approaching within hailing distance, his lookout in the crow's nest reported what he saw aboard the drifting vessel. 4 sailors on deck, Captain. No visible weaponry aboard. Very well, Casey, he said. Helmsman, turn to leeward and bring us alongside her. First mate, prepare the crew for boarding and rescue. The crew leaped to their appointed tasks. Boarding grapnels, ladders, and a few archers were prepared for any contingency. Taking in sail, Water Spirit turned and slowed, coming abreast of the ship, its momentum sending cascading waves over the smaller vessel. Grapnels away, Valon and his first mate, Eren Muldoon, commanded. Hurling grappling hooks over the other ship's gunwale and bracing the ropes with sturdy belaying pins, they pulled the crippled ship alongside. Heaving boarding ladders over the side, A small contingent of sailors were assembled to help the survivors aboard. "You men there, steady the ladders," Valon urged. "You there, bring fresh water and food. Prydwen, Samaj, Ariana, go aboard and help those men. Quickly now." He wasn't a patient man, but he was thorough. And the sailors that he chose were 3 of his best warriors. All of them were of fairy blood, and 2 of them, Samaj and Ariana, were women. Hopefully their gender would help to reduce any type of conflict that might occur. Samaj Rule was the first to descend the ladders, her shapely lyl-sulfur body drawing the stares of the 4 shipwrecked crewmen below her. The slender cutlass which hung low upon her hips brought looks that were even more curious from them. She was dressed in loose-fitting sailor's garb, her skin darkly tanned by the ocean's sun. She was as impressive as she was beautiful. With an acrobat's grace, she leaped the last few rungs to the deck below. Bowing in the trade merchant's sign for respect, she stood with her hands on her hips, arms corded with muscles strengthened by many years at sea. Her eyes met the sailor's eyes firmly and implied great capability. To an enemy, she would appear as dangerous as she was confident. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" she chided, while Ariana and Prydwen climbed down to stand beside her. The largest and visibly eldest among them moved forward to address her. Over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, he towered over Samaj by more than a foot, and he was easily twice her width. Carrying himself with an air of authority, he was an imposing, sinewy figure with a red beard that seemed to dance like flames in the sun. "I am Captain Kane Tanakoro of the merchant ship Kurumanchora, sailing out of Khan for Shamroon on a trading cruise. Our ship was wrecked in a typhoon some 12 days ago, and we've been adrift ever since." Trying to think of some question that she might ask that would prove to some extent that he was telling the truth, she asked, "What is the best watering hole in Khan?" "Why, that would be the Boar's Tusk Saloon, my lady, down by the docks on Ocean Avenue." "Damn straight," she answered. "Well, let's get you all aboard. We haven't got all day." In seconds, Kane and his crew were vaulting onto Water Spirit. They had no desire to ride aboard the doomed ship a moment longer. The water that they drank that day had never tasted so fresh or satisfying, and by nightfall, Water Spirit had brought them into the safety of Khan Harbor, towing Kurumanchura behind them. It would be another 2 months before Dartin and Leander arrived in Waysboro on the full moon of Sanguis, but neither of them was tempted to take another cruise in the meantime. Instead, they helped their captain resell his trade goods and begin the process of repairing his ship, all within the relative safety of land. It was good to be back home. The Prophecy. Deep within the bowels of under earth, beyond massive vaulted chambers and endless twisting passageways, there exists the Dark Alpha citadel Aeternus Nox. Its myriad entrances are protected by doors girded with adamant and ever-vigilant guards. It was here that Lothia's people first settled in eons past, and it is the sacred heart of the fairy peoples of the underworld. Its walls were built through harrowing toil and earthbound magic, and within the city are wonders beyond the imaginings of most mortals. To the men of the surface world, its buildings and byways would seem wholly alien, but its strange beauty was the result of generations of artisans and the complicated minds of the dark elves themselves. Masters of ancient lore and forgotten secrets, they adapted well to a life without a sun. Their eyes lost pigment, but became attuned to other energies, and they developed keen sight in even the most lightless environments. Through unknown perils, they adventured into the deepest places of the world and became masters of some, allies of others, and enemies of many. Their sorcery reflects all things dark, silent, and watchful, and it is not the magic of the sun and moon, but rather that of the heated furnace of the volcano and the thunderous power of the earthquake. Yet, like their cousins of the surface world, they hadn't forgotten the virtues of beauty, music, or the blood ties of family. Of their gods, there were many whose qualities could be found within the depths of Underearth, but none had captured the hearts of the dark elves like Lothia, the Queen Mother of Darkness. Her priests were devoted, and the power which she granted them was both terrible and mighty. And although the coven of Lothia didn't rule the Dark Elfar, its influence was unmistakable, and the most powerful rulers were always favored by the goddess. Policies and laws reflected her commandments, and the decisions of leaders often balanced upon the word of Lothia's clergy. So it was that great value was placed upon the advice of Lothia's chosen, and for generations untold, a child was born a prophet, one who could hear the voice of the goddess. On the day of ascension of the Dark Elfar unto the surface world, a prophetess was born. Upon her thigh, the eben mark of Lothia's hand was discovered, and she was named Andriel Donorum by her mother, and Pama Dedea by the coven, which meant the hand of the goddess. With many tears she was taken from her birth mother and raised by the coven within the temple of Lothia, and from thenceforth it was the only life that she knew. Her mothers were the many witches of the place, but beneath it all she was aware of the voice of a lady fair, one who called her daughter and bid her tell the priests of all the omens and tidings of her word. And it was Lothia that granted her the gift of sight, and with it she saw events that might come to pass if one was to take this action or that. And through her, the generals of the dark elven armies would ask for the outcomes of battles if they were to attack a foe, and the advice of the goddess proved true, and their victories over the empires of the sunlit world became countless. But sometimes Andriel's visions came unbidden, for Lothia would take over her body, and her voice was then not her own. During the winter solstice, when glacis is full, a male child will be born unto House Lucheron. The child will grow to become one of the most powerful Dark Elfar lords of all time. A great general, his victories over our enemies will become legendary, but his personal ambitions will be greater still. He will seek out an ancient artifact, and with it, he will attempt to claim dominion over the Dark Elves. This must never be allowed. The coven of Lothia must see that this outcome does not come to pass. When the Lord of House Lucheron is no longer useful, he must be betrayed. This is my command. And with that prophecy, the fate of many kingdoms would rest. But the gift of sight that the prophetess possessed was even greater than what Lothia had intended, and Andriel learned a secret that she kept even from the Queen Mother of Darkness. Pema Dedea was merciful. Antinius Molinar, chronicler of history. One-Eyed Jacks. Back at the tavern, Sonja had decided to join us for her break and to listen to a bit of my story. She'd poured herself a cup of her favorite willow root tea with a spoonful of honey, and she was sitting beside us with her usual air of quiet dignity. She could mingle with any kind of people, fit in with them as if they'd been friends all their lives, and yet she possessed an aura that spoke of royal upbringing. I was glad that she had joined us for a while. Well, lads, I began again. My story is a long and complex one, and for you to understand the forces that were then shaping the world, I must take you west, across the Andrian Ocean, to a place called Shantu Province in southern Dragonia, for it is there that our enemy, Vlad Lucheron, was born. Wasn't he the Dragonian commander, Eric asked, who led the Red Orcs in the Battle of Harg Pass about 100 years ago? The same. And didn't he die, Paul asked, in a great struggle against ancient gods? Well, Polly, I said, I was there when we faced the Ancient Ones, but to my knowledge, Vlad Lucheron still lives. What does that matter to us now? Garrett asked. Everything matters, but if you'll just bear with me for a moment, you'll see how our story and Vlad's came together in one of the most terrible struggles of our time. Let me take you back to the place where our nemesis was born. House Lucheron. The rays of glacis shone fully upon Centurio Domus the night that Vlad was born. His mother, Keturah, died during childbirth. His father, Aquan, never remarried, and Vlad remained an only child. It was a wonder to many that Aquan and his son were born on the same day of the same month, albeit 100 years apart. It was no wonder to Aquan, who felt that his plans had come to pass perfectly, apart from the death of his wife, which was definitely not what he'd intended. His love for Keturah had been perfect, and he could never choose another to replace her. But she had left him a perfect son, and all his energy from that day forth was for him. It was the way Keturah would have wanted it. Aquan was a Dragonian naval commander, and he demanded the strictest discipline. But Vlad's childhood home wasn't loveless, for his father had many servants. He realized that his son still needed a woman's guidance to temper his spirit. Vlad was the sole heir to House Lucheron, a name that was respected in all Dragonian royal circles, and so it would be for Vlad. Lucheron was a name with a king's heritage, and Aquan could trace his family tree down through the depths of time for 10,000 years, back to the time when the Dark Elfar were born. And so Vlad passed through his childhood, and he played all the games that other children from more normal families would have enjoyed. But his childhood was short-lived, for Aquan decided that Vlad would begin his ascension into manhood sometime around his 8th birthday. Aquan began by teaching him the rudiments of literacy, mathematics, physics, and astronomy, as well as the principles of arcane magic. Under his father's tutelage, he had only one companion, a young boy named Derek, whose father had been killed in battle. Honoring a former promise, Aquan had volunteered to take Derek in as a pupil. The two boys soon became inseparable, and Aquan worked them diligently, instilling within them a sense of competitiveness that would lead them both to victory. Aquan trained their bodies with all the known forms of exercise and martial science, and he exposed their minds to various instructors from a myriad of schools. He was training them to be leaders, he was teaching them to be conquerors. But what set the boys apart from their peers were the endless hours that Aquan challenged their minds. He tested them with games of mental skill, hide and seek, and sleight of hand, the most challenging of which were their games of Setch. Setch was a Dark Elfar invention, consisting of a large game board with 32 pieces of varying rank, the goal of which was to capture the opponent's king. Aquan was a masterful military strategist, and he was without equal at Setch. He rigorously drilled his students with its strategies, and they spoke often of the parallels between the game, the royal court, and the world. Setch trained their minds and cultivated multi-dimensional thinking within them. Derek soon became a gifted player, but Vlad always seemed to be one step ahead of him. By the time that Vlad was 10, he could challenge his father. By the time that he was 12, their games would often last for days, only to end in stalemate. Aquan was a master of plans, and he had taught his son well. By the time you enter the academy, he said, your such skills will rival my own. Never, father, Vlad said. You are the master. No, son. My time is passing. I am a master planner, but you are becoming a master of plans within plans. The day that Vlad was accepted into the academy, Aquan's fleet was called off to war. Vlad had never felt such sorrow. His father never knew such pride. Don't worry, my son, he said. I will return. Make me proud. Before he left, Aquan gave his son the signet ring of his family. More than a gesture, it made Vlad head of the household until his father returned. Even Aquan wasn't sure why he'd given it to his son, but a strong sense of foreboding had come over him. Never before had a call to war given him reason to be so afraid. During his first semester at school, Vlad was called before the headmaster. Vlad knew that students were only called before him in matters of urgency or for the enforcement of discipline. Vlad, we regret to inform you that your father's ship, Draco Terribilis, was lost in battle near the mouth of Eitzel Harbor. By all accounts, Aquan and his entire crew were lost at sea. I'm sorry, son. His greatest fears had come true, and now he was alone. An ordinary boy would have crumbled, but he only wavered. His logical mind realized that his father's death had only made him stronger, for now he had nothing more to fear. No enemy could ever use his loved ones against him. No love could enter his heart to weaken it. He would make his father proud. During the years that followed, he poured his energies into his studies. He learned more than his tutors ever intended. The house of Lucheron had once been a powerful clan, and it would be so again. He was Vlad Lucheron, the master of plans within plans. And the story of the betrayal of Vlad's father is recounted in Book 3, The Last Admiral, which is a prequel to Kur's Rage. I put it in that order as the third book so that more mystery would remain in parts 1 and 2. You could read The Last Admiral first, but it will spoil some of the mystery. All right, next time we'll start on page 83, chapter of Dragonia. Remember, stay safe and read Kur's Rage, part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga by Eric D.J. O'Brien. Have a great night.